Försöker vi kvinnor göra oss svaga för att attrahera män, det vill säga väcka deras empati och omhändertagande känslor. Ja, det här är en av flera känslor kring lidande och empati som nästa författare utforskar. Det duggar nämligen tätt med internationella besök och jag är så glad att jag får ha dem här i mitt program. Den här är en ung författare, lovordad i USA. Hon heter Leslie Jamison. Och hon har skrivit Gingarderoben, en roman som har väckt mycket uppmärksamhet. Och jag har koncentrerat mig ännu mer på empatiproven. För den handlar just om empati. Är det alltid av godo att vara empatisk eller finns det en avsikt bakom empatin och är den då lika god? Ni ska få höra om framförallt kvinnor och lidande och empati när jag träffade Leslie Jamison. Welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
You've been doing such an interesting research, and it's about the female empathy and female pain. If you use pain to get more attention.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the connection between pain and understanding, how sometimes experiences of pain can make us vulnerable in a way that makes us desire kind of both care from others and understanding from others, but also how experiences of pain can make us more understanding of what other people are going through.
Because this is the classic thing in fairy tales. The woman, Snow White, she's even dead and she kind of become alive because of the kiss from the prince. It's a bit between men and women. But what did you find?
Well, part of where my curiosity originated from was that I noticed as you're describing this figure of a female victim or a wounded woman, a woman who's gone through some sort of pain and is a bit passive and needs to be or wants to be saved by a man. But I was interested in the possibilities of representing female pain in a way that didn't turn women into simply passive victims, in a way that honored painful experiences, but also said those painful experiences don't have to take away female agency.
So have you used it yourself in your own experience?
Well, perhaps part of my writing came from a desire to analyze and maybe even critique some of my own behavior. I've certainly been aware of a desire to share certain painful experiences, but also a feeling of shame at that desire, saying, oh, am I just looking for attention? Would somebody judge me for looking for attention? But ultimately, I really believe in storytelling. I believe in how storytelling can connect us to other people, can connect us to other people's experiences. So ultimately, I wanted to write an affirmation of what it can mean to tell stories about pain.
In one of your books, empati proven in Swedish, empathy exams, you're even taking a job as an actor in a hospital. And tell us, what did you find out? Because it's a test about empathy.
Yeah, that was where the whole book began, actually. So I was working with medical students and had to pretend to have different things wrong with me. So in one, I had to pretend to have appendicitis. In another, I played a pregnant woman. I had a big pillow strapped around my belly and had to fake the symptoms of preeclampsia. Some of the situations were a bit more psychological. I faked or pretended to be a woman who was experiencing seizures, but the seizures were actually about grief. She was grieving for her brother. So I had to be in these simulated situations where medical students would try to figure out what was wrong with me based on my acting. But then I was evaluating the medical students on not only how well they diagnosed me, but what kind of empathy they were showing me as they were diagnosing me. And I had always thought of empathy as this deep, mysterious process. I hadn't thought about it as something that you could grade 1 to 5 on a, exam card. So that got me started thinking, well, what do we actually mean when we say empathy? What is that concept, and how are we constantly grading each other's capacity for empathy, grading the empathy that we receive, trying to grade our own capacity to give empathy to others? And that launched this whole collection of explorations into how complicated empathy can become.
And when you saw the students, did they react differently?
They were all a huge range of responses. So some students seem naturally quite gifted at empathy. If you are pretending to be in pain, they will respond with compassion and concern. Some students were really, it seemed good that they were in this training because they had a bit more to learn about what empathy might look like. And, for example, would continue going through an internal checklist of questions, even if the patient, me, their fake patient, was really going through an intense physical experience. So part of what these simulated situations were about was how to teach students a different set of actions and questions that they could go through in order to show more empathy.
Did you find out that if you show too much pain, or you kind of ask for too much empathy, that it will turn the other way around?
I certainly think that can happen all the time, especially I think it can happen in life if there seems to be you're making a demand on other people to respond to you in a certain way, or a demand to respond to your pain in a certain way. I think that can push people away. One of the big things where my thinking changed had to do with this idea of whether or not empathy or an empathetic response can be a choice or not. I had always thought of it as something that had to be instinctual, like you see somebody in pain and you just feel something towards them. But I started to think about the ways in which it's a much more complicated exchange between instinctive feelings and choices we make to pay attention to other people's lives, to ask people questions, that these are choices that can then result in that feeling of empathy rising up inside of us.
And even a selfish thing to do?
Sometimes, yeah. I think that there can be a way that in cultural conversations we talk about empathy as an unquestioned good. Like, of course, it's wonderful to have empathy. It's wonderful to be empathetic. But I also think there are ways that when we extend empathy or tell ourselves we're extending empathy towards other people, it can be very self-serving because it makes us feel good about ourselves, right? Like, I am feeling sad for you.
I'm a good person.
That means I'm a good person, exactly. So I wanted to analyze that part of it, to show empathy not just as a kind of gold star or something in a very simple way that was beneficial, but to say what are all the ways that it might serve the self and another person at once.
But it's interesting, if you get all that empathy, as you really experience that yourself, and then you kind of, maybe you end up in a very closed-in position, being that weak woman in this case, and you lose the freedom of doing whatever you want.
Absolutely. I think that there is that danger of sort of defining identity solely by victimhood or solely by pain. So much of what I'm interested in is how experiencing something painful doesn't have to shut you inside your own experience or your own life, but it can actually open you out towards the lives of others. So that's part of why so many of the pieces in my book are not about my life. They're reported pieces where I'm working as a journalist, interviewing other people about their lives.
You have a tattoo. Could you show us that? It's in Latin. And you should describe it.
Yeah. Well, the tattoo is from a Roman playwright named Terence. And the quote is, Homo sum humani nil a me alienum puto, which translated means roughly, I am human. I consider that nothing human is alien to me. And it was something I heard a woman say, and it immediately struck me as not necessarily something that was always true, but something to aspire towards, right? To hear somebody describe something about their experience and to start thinking not in terms of how that is other to me or foreign to me, but like how does that connect to something that I've lived, or how can I use something I've gone through to maybe try to imagine what this person is going through.
But this is what you've been doing when you've been writing. Even your novel is like that. You have experienced a lot of things yourself. quite difficult periods of your life, and then you use that experience in your writing.
That's the hope. I mean, then the hope is, and I think it connects to what you were asking about earlier, the hope is that experience, or reflecting about my own experience, or anyone's reflecting about their experience, doesn't have to mean that they're wholly preoccupied by just what they've gone through, that it sharpens the way that you gaze out at the world. So I think when I write fiction, the whole activity of fiction is about imagining the lives of other people. And I think when a writer does that, they're always using what they have gone through to think through what this fictional character might be experiencing. And my novel is about a young woman who is caring for her grandmother when her grandmother dies, and then goes to seek out her aunt, a woman she's never met, who's been estranged from her family for many years. And she finds her in this very self-destructive state, drinking herself to death. And the novel is about her quest to kind of save this woman, and also the ways in which she identifies with what this woman is going through. But it's also about what you were mentioning earlier, this way that saving her aunt is partially altruistic, about doing good for somebody, but it's also making her feel good about herself, to say, oh, I can be a kind of savior figure.
But it's interesting also that there are always something that you gain out of a behavior, and being weak and trying to get attention for that. Is that typically female, or do we see it as a female thing? Because you've now been doing research on women.
Yeah,
But do you see it among men as well?
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, I would say I think that it is, I think of that as like a quite critical stereotype that's kind of applied to women. And
Marilyn Monroe or something like that.
Right, the kind of performance of victimhood as a cry for attention. I think there can be a way that that's seen in quite cynical terms. And I think I'm interested in sort of liberating it from that cynical viewpoint and saying it's a human thing to want to have your experiences witnessed. I think it's also a human thing to be curious about what other people have lived, and those don't have to be mutually exclusive states of being. You can be attentive to other people's lives and have a desire to narrate your own. I do think men and women have quite different relationships to pain in terms of the cultural expectations and cultural taboos around expressing pain. I think men often feel that it looks weak to confess pain. And I think that maybe that's a different taboo than a woman who might face the idea that she's kind of performing victimhood or disempowering herself. But that both can be obstacles to just saying, look, I went through this thing and it was difficult.
Can you feel empathy for somebody that you don't like?
Yeah. I think you can. I think it connects to the idea that empathy doesn't just have to be instinctive. It can be a choice. I write in one of the pieces about, one of the essays about my experience going to a gathering of people who identify as having this disease called Morgellons disease that most doctors think is psychosomatic. It's just in your head. But they experience skin symptoms, so strange kind of itching and sensations on their skin, and strange fibers and fuzz coming out of their skin. And it's something that can sound a bit absurd from the outside, or can sound just like a delusion. And as I interviewed all of these people and tried to think about what were they going through and why were they gathering together, what were they getting out of that, it wasn't that I disliked them, but the question of the piece was, can I experience empathy for these people, or something I might want to call empathy, even if I don't believe that their pain is coming from the same place they think it's coming from.
It's a very interesting essay, that one. And I think it's a problem that hospitals are dealing with, and doctors, because these people are, I mean, going around and between different doctors, different hospitals, and they don't get empathy. Yeah,
I think that so many of the people that I interviewed when I was writing that piece had the same experience over and over again, of not failing to get treatment, but also feeling like they were being dismissed as a kind of joke. And my response ended up being that even if they were experiencing a different sort of medical condition than they thought they were experiencing, that they still deserved to be taken seriously and to be treated as people whose pain was real. I wanted to question the way we can so easily decide, well, what sort of pain is real and what sort of pain isn't. If somebody's in pain, they are articulating something true.
And who are you to decide? If you who am I to decide?
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I really enjoyed it, and it's a good conversation piece.
Absolutely. Well, it was wonderful to talk about it with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming here.